I've always believed that love conquers all. I thought as long as two people were committed to each other, they could overcome any obstacle. But I never imagined one of those obstacles would be my future mother-in-law. John and I have a long history. We met in high school when we were just teenagers. He was my first real boyfriend, the kind of guy who made my heart race every time he walked into the room. I'll never forget the day he asked me to be his girlfriend. We were at a football game, sitting in the bleachers, and he leaned over, smiling nervously, and said, "So, do you want to make this official?" From that moment on, we were inseparable. We went to prom together, celebrated every milestone, and shared countless memories. I was certain he was the one. But there was one problem: his mother, Debbie. Debbie seemed polite at first. She'd ask me about school, compliment my outfits, and even invite me over for family dinners. I thought we were building a good relationship. But as time went on, her true feelings about me started to surface. She'd make subtle comments about how young love doesn't last, or how John should focus on his future. At first, I brushed it off as motherly advice, but then the comments became more targeted. She'd tell John he was too good for me or suggest that I was distracting him from his studies. John, being the peacekeeper he is, would always try to downplay her words. "She doesn't mean it like that," he'd say. "She just wants what's best for me." But her interference only grew worse. By the time we graduated high school, Debbie had convinced John that our relationship was holding him back. "You need to focus on college," she told him. "You're too young to be tied down." John broke up with me shortly after graduation. He said it wasn't my fault, but I knew Debbie was behind it. "I just think we need to focus on ourselves right now," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Maybe we'll find our way back to each other someday." I was devastated. Losing John felt like losing a piece of myself. I cried for weeks, replaying our conversations in my head and wondering what I could have done differently. For the next few years, we had no contact. I went to college, made new friends, and tried to move on. I even dated a few people, but none of them compared to John. He was always in the back of my mind, the what if I couldn't let go of. Then, during my sophomore year, everything changed. I received a friend request from John on Facebook. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name. I debated whether to accept it, but curiosity got the better of me. Our conversation started out casual, just two old friends catching up. But it didn't take long for deeper feelings to resurface. John admitted he'd missed me and regretted how things ended. "I was an idiot," he said. "I let my mom get in my head." Hearing those words felt like a balm to my broken heart. I still loved him, and the thought of getting a second chance was too good to pass up. After weeks of talking, we decided to give our relationship another try. When John told Debbie we were back together, her reaction was dramatic, to say the least. She cried, actual tears, and accused me of manipulating him. "She's using you," she told him. "You're too good for her." Her words stung, but I tried to stay optimistic. I thought if she saw how happy John and I were together, she'd eventually come around. For a while, things were manageable. Debbie wasn't thrilled about our relationship, but she kept her distance. I chalked it up to her needing time to adjust. But as the months went by, her hostility became more apparent. She'd make passive-aggressive comments during family gatherings, like, "Oh, John, remember when you used to date someone who liked sports?" Or, "I'm sure she'll grow into a great wife, eventually." I bit my tongue, refusing to stoop to her level. I told myself I'd win her over by being patient and respectful. But Debbie had no interest in building a relationship with me. Her efforts to sabotage our relationship became more blatant. She started introducing John to women from her church and workplace, hoping he'd leave me for someone she approved of. She even asked her friends if they had daughters who were single and looking for a good man. John dismissed her attempts, reassuring me that he was committed to me. But his approach to handling Debbie frustrated me. Instead of confronting her, he'd ask me to just ignore it. Why do you let her get away with this? I asked him one night after she tried to set him up with a coworker. She doesn't mean any harm, he said. She just doesn't understand our relationship. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew Debbie's actions weren't innocent. She wanted me out of the picture, and she wasn't going to stop until she got her way. 3 months ago, John proposed to me. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. He planned the perfect proposal, just the two of us at our favorite park. He got down on one knee, and I said yes without hesitation. For a brief moment, I felt like everything was falling into place. I thought Debbie would finally see how serious we were about each other and accept me as part of the family. I couldn't have been more wrong. Debbie didn't show up to our engagement party. She claimed she wasn't feeling well, but I knew it was an excuse. Later, she skipped the family dinner we hosted to introduce both sides. Her absence felt like a deliberate attempt to sabotage our celebration. Her behavior hurt, but I tried not to let it ruin my happiness. I told myself that her opinion didn't matter as long as John and I were on the same page. But the situation came to a head when John decided to confront Debbie about her behavior. He told her it was unacceptable for her to skip important events in our lives. Instead of apologizing, she turned the conversation into a sob story. She claimed she never got the wedding of her dreams. She said she'd been forced to have a courthouse ceremony because she was pregnant with John, and seeing me in a white dress brought back painful memories. Her solution? She wanted to wear white to our wedding while I wore pink or lavender. She also suggested walking me down the aisle so she could experience a real wedding. When John brought this idea to me, I was speechless. You think this is a good idea? I asked, barely able to contain my anger. She just wants to feel included, he said defensively. Included? I snapped. This isn't about inclusion, John. This is about control. She's trying to hijack our wedding. Update 1. Our argument that night lasted for hours. I couldn't believe John was defending his mother's ridiculous demands. The more I tried to make him see reason, the more defensive he became. She just wants to feel comfortable, he said, as though that excused her behavior. What about my comfort, John? I shot back. This is our wedding. Why should her feelings matter more than mine? You're making it sound like I'm taking her side, he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Aren't you? I countered. You didn't even ask me how I felt before entertaining her idea. You just assumed I'd go along with it. The fight escalated from there. John accused me of being petty and selfish, while I accused him of being a mama's boy. For the first time in our relationship, I began to doubt whether we were truly compatible. When the argument finally ended, we were both emotionally drained. We agreed to take some time to cool off, but the damage had been done. I spent the next few days replaying the fight in my head, wondering if I was overreacting. I turned to Reddit for advice, hoping for some clarity. I explained the situation in detail, from Debbie's past attempts to sabotage our relationship to her latest demands. The responses were overwhelming. One commenter wrote, "This isn't about a dress. It's about control. She wants to humiliate you and assert her dominance over your relationship. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life competing with her for your fiancé's loyalty?" Another said, "Your fiancé needs to grow a spine. If he can't stand up to his mother now, what makes you think he'll do it later? Imagine having kids with this man. Debbie will try to dictate everything." Their words hit me hard. Deep down, I knew they were right. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about the future John and I were trying to build together. If he couldn't stand up to Debbie now, what kind of partner would he be in the long run? I spent the next few days reflecting on our relationship. I loved John, but I couldn't ignore the cracks that Debbie had caused. Her constant interference had created a rift between us, and I wasn't sure if we could repair it. John eventually came to me, looking remorseful. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted. "You're right. I should have talked to you before even considering her request. I'm sorry." His apology was a start, but it wasn't enough. I told him we needed to have a serious conversation about boundaries and expectations moving forward. "I can't keep living like this, John," I said. "Your mom has been trying to sabotage our relationship from the beginning, and you've let her. I need to know that you're willing to put me first." "I do put you first," he insisted. "Do you?" I asked. "Because it doesn't feel like it. When she insults me or undermines me, you let it slide. When she makes outrageous demands, you consider them without even asking how I feel. That's not putting me first." John was silent for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want me to do?" I took a deep breath and laid out my terms. "If we're going to move forward, you need to set boundaries with your mom. That means going low contact and not letting her interfere in our wedding planning. I also think we should postpone the wedding by a year to make sure you're serious about sticking to these boundaries. And we need to start therapy, both individually and as a couple." John hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he was going to argue. But then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Hearing those words gave me a glimmer of hope. But I knew actions spoke louder than words. The confrontation. The next step was confronting Debbie. I told John that I wanted to be present for the conversation. In the past, whenever he tried to talk to her about her behavior, he'd come back with excuses about why he didn't push the issue. I wasn't going to let that happen this time. John agreed, and we set a date to visit Debbie. I asked John's dad, Dan, and my own dad to join us for support. Debbie was less likely to manipulate the situation if we had witnesses. When we arrived at her house, my heart was pounding. I had no idea how she was going to react, but I was determined to stand my ground. John started the conversation by addressing her absence at our engagement party and family dinner. "Mom, it's not okay that you skipped those events," he said firmly. "You hurt both of us by not showing up." Debbie looked taken aback. "I wasn't feeling well," she said. "That's not true," John replied. "You told me you didn't want to go because of my name. Why do you have such a problem with her?" Debbie's eyes widened. "I don't have a problem with her," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "I love her like a daughter." John didn't let her off the hook. "If that's true, then why have you been trying to set me up with other women? Why do you keep undermining our relationship?" Debbie's face turned red. "I was just trying to help," she said. "You deserve someone who can keep up with you. I didn't mean anything by it." "Mom, stop," John said, his voice rising. "You've been disrespecting my name for years. It's not okay." That's when Debbie turned her attention to me. "What did you do to him?" she demanded. "He never used to talk to me like this. You've poisoned him against me." I was stunned by her audacity, but I refused to let her intimidate me. "I haven't poisoned him against you," I said calmly. "He's standing up for our relationship because he loves me." Debbie scoffed. "Love? You think this is love? He used to be such a good boy before you came along. Now he's disrespectful and distant. You've ruined him." John's dad, Dan, stepped in at that point. "Debbie, that's enough," he said. "You've been trying to control John for years, and it's time to let go. He's an adult, and he's getting married. You need to respect his choices." Debbie's response was to burst into tears. "You're all ganging up on me," she wailed. "I can't believe this is happening. I just wanted to feel included." No, Mom, John said firmly. You wanted to control everything. That's why you asked to wear white and walk, my name, down the aisle. It's not about inclusion, it's about you. Debbie's tears quickly turned to anger. Fine, she snapped. If you don't want me at your wedding, just say so. I won't come. Is that what you want? John took a deep breath. I want you there, Mom. But only if you can respect us and stop trying to make everything about you. Update 2. The room fell silent after John's words. Debbie stared at him, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. I've done everything for you, she said, her voice trembling. I gave up my life to raise you, and this is how you repay me? By choosing her over me? My chest tightened at the venom in her voice. Debbie wasn't just trying to guilt-trip John, she was actively framing me as an enemy. John, to his credit, didn't back down. This isn't about choosing anyone over anyone else, he said, his voice steady but firm. It's about boundaries. I'm an adult now, and I'm building a life with my name. If you can't accept that, you're going to lose me. Debbie's lip quivered, and I could see the gears turning in her head as she calculated her next move. She switched back to tears, clutching her chest dramatically. I can't believe this. My own son, turning on me. Do you even care about how this is affecting me? I'm your mother. At that moment, I texted my dad and Dan, who were waiting outside, to come in. I'd anticipated Debbie's theatrics and wanted witnesses to keep the situation grounded. When they entered the room, Debbie's demeanor shifted slightly, though she didn't stop crying. Dan sighed, clearly fed up. Debbie, stop playing the victim, he said. John isn't turning on you, he's trying to set boundaries. And honestly, you need to respect them. Debbie turned her tear-streaked face toward him. Oh, so now you're on her side too, she said, motioning toward me like I was some kind of villain. It's not about sides, Dan replied calmly. It's about what's best for John and his future. And right now, you're jeopardizing that with your behavior. My dad, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke up. Debbie, I understand that letting go is hard. But your son is starting a new chapter in his life, and you need to let him live it. This isn't about you, it's about him and my name. Debbie didn't respond. Instead, she folded her arms and stared at the floor, her face set in a stubborn pout. John took the opportunity to reiterate his boundaries. Mom, here's what's going to happen, he said. You're welcome to attend the wedding, but only if you respect our decisions. That means no more comments about my name, no more trying to interfere, and definitely no wearing white. If you can't do that, I'll have to go low contact. Debbie looked up sharply. Low contact? What does that even mean? It means I won't visit as often or answer your calls as much, John explained. I'm serious, Mom. If you keep this up, you're going to push me away. Debbie's face turned red. Fine, she shouted. Do whatever you want. I've clearly been replaced. The conversation ended on that sour note. Debbie refused to apologize or acknowledge her role in the conflict, but John stood firm in his decision. The ride home was quiet. John stared out the window, his expression unreadable. I reached over and placed my hand on his, giving it a gentle squeeze. Are you okay? I asked softly. He nodded but didn't say anything. When we got back to our apartment, he finally broke down. I hate this, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I feel like I'm being forced to choose between you and my mom. You're not choosing, I said gently. You're setting boundaries. That's what healthy relationships are about. He nodded, wiping his eyes. I know. It's just hard. She's my mom, you know. I feel like I'm abandoning her. You're not abandoning her, I said firmly. You're giving her a chance to change. Whether she takes it is up to her. John seemed to take some comfort in my words, but I knew the situation was far from resolved. The next few weeks were tense. Debbie called John multiple times, alternating between anger and tears. At one point, she even accused him of emotionally abusing her, which was both ridiculous and infuriating. John handled it better than I expected. He stuck to the boundaries we'd set, refusing to engage with her manipulative tactics. He also started individual therapy, which seemed to help him process his feelings. Our couples therapy sessions were a mixed bag. While John was committed to working on our relationship, it was clear that Debbie's influence still weighed heavily on him. There were moments when I wondered if we'd ever fully move past her shadow. About a month after the confrontation, Debbie made one final attempt to assert control. She showed up at our apartment unannounced, demanding to talk to John. I was the one who answered the door. Debbie glared at me, her expression a mix of disdain and desperation. "I need to see my son," she said curtly. "He's not home," I replied, which was true. John was at work. Debbie scoffed. "Convenient," she said. "Tell him I was here. And tell him he's breaking my heart." With that, she turned on her heel and marched off. I stood there, stunned by her audacity. When John came home and I told him what happened, he sighed heavily. "She's never going to stop, is she?" he said. "Not unless you stick to your boundaries," I said. "This is a test, John. She wants to see if she can break you." He nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. "She's not going to win," he said. Since that day, things have slowly started to improve. John has maintained low contact with Debbie, limiting their interactions to occasional phone calls and visits. While she still tries to push boundaries, he's gotten better at shutting her down. Our wedding is still postponed, but I'm okay with that. I want to make sure we're on solid ground before taking that next step. As for Debbie, I hope she gets the help she clearly needs. Her behavior stems from her own unresolved issues, and while I empathize with her struggles, I refuse to let her drag us down. This experience has taught me the importance of setting boundaries and standing up for myself. It's also shown me that love isn't just about feelings, it's about action. John has proven that he's willing to fight for our relationship, and for that, I'm grateful.